Baton attacks, shields as weapons, kettling. After today's report into G20 policing, will they be seen again on British streets? Good evening. The report by the Chief Inspector of Police into the handling of the G20 protesters questions many of the tactics used to contain them. Batons, shields, kettling or herding are all to be reviewed. The new head of ACPO tells us tonight there has to be a balance between the fundamental human right to protest and security needs. Tonight, it was clearly a balance which, according to the police watchdog himself, was clearly got wrong. Also tonight, continuing inter-ethnic strife in China's far-flung Xinjiang province. 150 dead amid some of the worst ethnic violence in China in decades. Michael Jackson's golden casket is wheeled away from his funeral to take centre stage at his memorial, live in this hour. And the strange case of the Prime Minister, the G8 wives, escorts, a controversial minister and the President's wife.
And the other headlines tonight. Following the 7th swine flu death, we're in the West Midlands. More people have been infected there than in any other region. One MP tells us the official advice is insufficient. Claims that immigrants are given priority when social housing is allocated are dismissed as a myth. And Prince Charles lays a wreath at the new memorial to the 52 victims of the London bombings on the 4th anniversary of the terrorist attacks.
It turned out to be a pivotal moment in British policing. The controversial containment of protesters at the G20 demonstrations in London, in which a bystander, Ian Tomlinson, was shoved by an officer and later died. Now the police watchdog has criticised those tactics and officers' training. The police were accused of failing to allow peaceful protest, whilst their containment tactics, known as kettling, needed to change. A review was also needed into the use of batons and riot shields. The Metropolitan Police said it would be looking at officers' training. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel.
This report is the first strategic response to the thousands of G20 images like this. The aggressive use of shields, the proportionality of force, and the tactic of containment or kettling. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary found senior officers were too focused on dealing with disorder and not enough on allowing peaceful protest. That public order training and tactics were inadequate for the modern day, and that some commanders lacked the necessary knowledge on human rights.
You have to see the public order issue about protest through a new lens. And training is part of that new lens. And the new lens is, we will not start at the beginning and think, is it lawful or unlawful? We'll start with the presumption in favour of it. We will endeavour to facilitate it unless it becomes unreasonable.
There are 12 recommendations which are by no means in themselves revolutionary. Better planning, training and communication, with the aim of reducing confrontation and the risk of alienating public confidence in an age of citizen journalism where every police action can be recorded and dispatched to websites in a matter of seconds.
I think in this era, when more protest is likely, I think there is a risk of more disruption because the thing becomes more conflictual. I think there's more likelihood of problematic images of the police because everybody has cameras now, and I do think that the public will progressively pick up on that and in their own British way become concerned, collectively concerned over a period of time. That's why I think we should change.
Yet according to a Mori poll conducted by HMIC for this report, the public are divided about the handling of the G20 protests. 46% thought the police dealt with them fairly or very well, but 45% felt the police handled them not very or not at all well. But the poll also revealed considerable public support for the tactic of kettling. 77% said it was sometimes or always justified to contain protesters, and that rose to 84% when there was a threat to the safety of the public. The report does not reject the Metropolitan Police's tactic of containment.
We accept with the issue of containment, it is not perfect. We've always accepted that. It's about us making sure we learn the lessons and get better on the rare occasion that we do use it.
Latest figures from the Independent Police Complaints Commission show that a total of 60 complaints of police conduct are now the subject of official inquiries, the most notable being that into the death of Ian Tomlinson. This report would not have happened had Ian Tomlinson not died shortly after being hit and pushed to the ground in this passageway. While it does not go into those circumstances, the report emphasises the need for police to respect the rights of each and every individual protester, rather than view the demonstration as a whole in deciding how to react and what tactics to use. The clear implication from this report is to try and ensure that there's no repeat of the Tomlinson tragedy. Today's report is just the beginning. The police watchdog warns the service isn't yet ready to cope on the scale of the forthcoming Olympics. A closer examination of possible alternative tactics will be published later this year.
I think the police have been misbehaving on protests for years. It's just that at the G20 they got found out by the media, by the people that were filming it themselves, and this has provoked some self-examination, and this report is welcome in that regard, but it depends on whether it translates into different behaviour on the ground at future protests like this summer's climate camp.
A new set of guidelines to all forces on public order was only issued 2 years ago, but now that's destined to be rewritten, where the strictures are clearer about what's expected of officers in pressured situations, and where the watchdog advises there should be only one school of thought.
Simon Israel reporting. Earlier I spoke to the incoming president of the Association of Chief Police Officers, Sir Hugh Ord. I began by putting it to him that the police had got the balance wrong at the G20 between the needs of law and order and the right to protest.
Well, certainly the report shows that the Metropolitan Police did an awful lot of things very well. It made the point they policed 5,000 demonstrations a year. They also clearly identified issues where we need to do some work, and as the incoming president of ACPO, I need to take some of that training and indeed looking at the manual on board, which of course we will do. The Metropolitan Police asked for this review, and I'm sure they're more than willing to accept the recommendations, and we'll do all we can to drive that progress forward as quickly as we can.
The difficulty here was that this was about the most prestigious meeting you could possibly have to police, and clearly security dictated that they really didn't want any protests at all.
Well, of course, the tradition of British policing is to tolerate protest. It's a tradition of British society, and as a police officer, I will die in a ditch over the right of people to protest. It's something we shall not and could not and should not challenge.
What you've said is philosophically, obviously, very, very germane, but what people are going to remember, the images that were picked up by people's local mobile phones and the rest of it, of really serious hammering with police battles, a lot of people injured, some really horrible scenes that you do not expect to see on the streets of British cities at the hands of the police.
We do need to put the report in context. The report clearly said that the Metropolitan Police did an awful lot of things very well, and I think we need to remember that whilst we still focus and show a high degree of willingness to learn from the issues that have been raised, to make the training better where we need to make sure the policies and procedures are in place. That's my responsibility. I take that fully on board in my new role. And so the next time we have one of these complicated issues, we police it in an even more professional way than the Met did its level best to do on that occasion.
And as you look at the policing manual, will kettling remain in it?
Let's be clear around this. The human rights legislation is in place. It's not a threat to good policing, it's a support to good policing. In my current job as a Chief Constable of Northern Ireland, very sadly, we have had to deploy live fire in public order situations entirely compliant with human rights. Your officers have had to return fire to save people they were trying to protect from incoming ammunition. So the human rights legislation requires proportionality, but we have to face up to the fact there are people in the society who do not want to demonstrate peacefully, who want to actually destroy that right by infiltration and by attacking police and doing their level best to show police in a bad light. So it's that complexity we have to come to terms with. That does not mean we should not be open to change, and I'm a big believer in learning from these situations and moving policing on to the next dimension.
Well, Sir Hugh Orde, the incoming president of ACPO, talking to us earlier from Manchester. It is a threat to China's self-image as a country where different ethnic groups supposedly live in harmony. Following the deaths of more than 150 people when Muslim Uyghur protesters turned on their Han Chinese neighbours, there were further clashes today. Police used tear gas to disperse Han Chinese as they took revenge, smashing Uyghur property in the western city of Urumqi with rocks, machetes and clubs. Earlier, Uyghur women demonstrated against the arrests of more than 1,400 people. After Sunday's violent clashes in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang province, violence is reported to have spread to other cities in the region, including Kashgar and Karamay. This report from our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, does contain some distressing images.
They took my son away, she shouts. Another screams that her husband has disappeared. Some 200 Uyghur women protested this morning after a sweep through the city in which the police arrested Uyghur men, presumably those they believe took part in riots and attacks against Han Chinese on Sunday. The government says it has detained more than 1,400 people. The women fear what will happen to their relatives.
Our situation is too tragic. It will be even better to shoot us and kill us than to live like this. The people that protested the other day on the riots, men and women, we heard they were killed and died in a very, very tragic way.
After a while, they were made to disperse. Then more protests started, as Uyghurs complained that now the women had been arrested too.
They took them all away and took them inside. They took all the women and they have not released them yet. There are also children, 7 and 8 years old, all inside. China has no law. The law only protects some people.
The police seemed to waver at times, but officials were clear about how they would treat rioters.
We are protecting the safety of the women and the children, but those who took part in the riots will be dealt with severely. If they were involved in disruption and violence, they will be educated.
The government says at least 150 people were killed when Uyghurs attacked Han on Sunday. Today, Han Chinese picked up sticks and other weapons to take revenge. Victory belongs to the Han, he shouts. They went on to smash up Uyghur-owned property and hunt down Uyghurs. It's not known how many were injured or whether any were killed when the two groups confronted each other down alleyways and side streets away from the cameras. The Han shouting, "They attacked us, now it's our turn to attack them." Billboards promote an image of interethnic harmony, but tension has been bubbling under the surface for years as the government encourages more Han migration. The central authorities say that the violence is a conspiracy of foreign forces, led by the Uyghur leader in exile, Rabia Kadir.
Kadir has been deceiving the world. She's been consistently trying to split China's territory and destroy the harmonious relationship amongst the people of Xinjiang.
In Washington, she denied that she had called for rioting.
Uyghurs should make their demands in a peaceful way. They should understand that it was the Chinese government which created the problems between Uyghurs and Chinese, but there shouldn't be this problem between people. The Chinese government should also listen to Uyghur people's demands and not oppress us. How could we accept such brutality, killing and arresting of innocent Uyghurs?
By late afternoon, a curfew had been imposed in Urumqi. "Go home," the police shouted. "If you stay in the street, you're responsible for whatever happens." Uyghurs rarely confront the state, but now it seems that many have lost their fear. Violence between Han and Uyghurs threatens the myth of China's harmonious society as the Communist Party struggles to reassert control.
Lindsay Hilsum reporting. Mariah Carey, Lionel Richie, Stevie Wonder, just some of the stars performing tonight at Michael Jackson's memorial concert in Los Angeles. His body has been transported there in a vast golden coffin after a family funeral at a nearby cemetery. More than 1.5 million people applied for tickets online for the event, with 18,000 chosen at random. Sarah Smith joins us from the Staples Center in Los Angeles. Sarah.
Yes, John, for Michael Jackson and for his family, it is all about the public performance, because this is a man whose talents and whose flaws were always on full display during his life, and his family are determined to keep that spotlight on him in death with this one last spectacular show. As you say, we've heard from Stevie Wonder and Lionel Richie in the last few minutes and seen a video tribute to Jackson's life.
Father, help your children and don't let them fall by the side of the road.
We've also seen a very emotional performance from Mariah Carey, but it is Michael Jackson's gilded coffin that's dominating this ceremony, that's filled with all his celebrity friends.
Michael Jackson's golden casket, smothered in red roses, is to be the special surprise guest at his own memorial celebration. Leaving this Los Angeles cemetery this morning, we still don't know where he'll eventually be buried. The entire Jackson family had a private service here before getting into a huge collection of black SUVs that will take them to the Staples Center. Their every move followed on live television, as it has been for days. This huge stadium seemed to turn into a cathedral as Jackson's coffin arrived, welcomed by a full choir. Smokey Robinson read letters from Diana Ross and one from Nelson Mandela.
Michael became close to us after he started visiting and performing in South Africa regularly. We grew fond of him, and he became a close member of our family.
Hidden in the huge crowd, Brooke Shields, Usher, Wesley Snipes, Jennifer Hudson and Sean Puffy Combs.
You ready to fight for your children?
Do not touch me!
Nobody touched you here.
You just did! Don't!
Are you ready to fight for your children?
Not coming, Debbie Rowe, mother of Jackson's 2 eldest children. She's not enjoying the public attention, but she still might fight for custody. Elizabeth Taylor will be another no-show. Tweeting on Twitter, "I just don't believe Michael would want me to share my grief with millions of others." She says this is not a public event. Well, it might not be for her, but with thousands of fans inside and outside the Staples Center, and they say possibly 1 billion watching worldwide, this is one of the biggest send-offs in history.
Sarah, is there just a whiff of a chance the media have overstoked this thing? I noticed there were no masses of millions of weeping mourners on the freeways, and you, Lee, seem to be in front of a positively empty space outside Staples.
Well, both of those are because the police closed the freeways and the entire area around the Staples Centre, John. So unless you've got a blue wristband like this, you're certainly not allowed anywhere near this event. It's swarming with media, no mourners because they can't get in. There are a few thousand on the streets of LA. The police made it pretty clear you wouldn't get anywhere near here, and there was no point in turning out in the streets. The test will be how many people watched it on television. This is a spectacular show. It's designed to attract the biggest global TV audience it possibly can, and that's when we'll know whether or not we overstated the global grief about Michael Jackson's death. But as you know, this story has been filled with rumours and allegations and things that turned out not to be true from the very start, and that is going to carry on being the case for weeks after this event is over. The latest rumour, and I have no idea whether or not this is true, John, but sources inside the LAPD are now claiming that that gilded casket that's the centrepiece of this ceremony inside the Staples Center, they're saying it doesn't even have Michael Jackson's body in it. That may be true, it may not. So many of the things to do with this story have proved not to be true, including the prediction that the streets would be thronging with tens of thousands of people. But then, John, when it comes to Michael Jackson's life and his death, so many things we'll just never find out what the real truth was.
Sarah Smith in Los Angeles. Now here, MPs on the Home Affairs Select Committee have warned that the London Underground is still extremely vulnerable to a terrorist attack, 4 years to the day that suicide bombers detonated explosives on the tube and a bus. Samira has more and the rest of the day's news.
The warning coincided with the unveiling of a stainless steel monument to the 52 victims in Hyde Park at a ceremony attended by the Prime Minister, Prince Charles and the bereaved.
James Adams, Sam Badham and Lee Christopher Harris, Anthony Fatai Williams.
52 pillars for the 52 victims, arranged in clusters on the edge of Hyde Park. Their anonymity representing the randomness of those struck down that day. At today's official unveiling, public words of courage and fortitude.
The families of the victims, the survivors, and the stout-hearted emergency services remain very much in our thoughts and prayers. You are a moving example of holding together bravely in the face of such inhuman and deplorable outrage.
Anthony Gormley, who advised the architects, believes the monument creates order out of chaos. The architects had also worked closely with the families, including Saba Mozaka, whose mother, Benaz, died in the bombing between King's Cross and Russell Square.
I think of my mum first and foremost. I wonder what she would have thought of it. She loved Hyde Park and she enjoyed spending time in the park, and I hope that she would have loved it, and I think of her and I think that she would have been proud that I was able to work on this project. And then obviously I think of all the other families and their loss. We've become very close as a group, and some very special friendships and bonds have been formed, and I know families that have lost their children, siblings have been lost. So for me, the 7th of July, while it was a wider incident, for me it's a very individual loss.
The pillars are made of stainless steel, a robust material designed to stand for many generations to come.
A British soldier has been killed in a helicopter accident in Afghanistan. The Ministry of Defence says the soldier from 22 Engineer Regiment, the Royal Engineers, died along with 2 Canadian soldiers when their craft crashed in Zabul province yesterday. A safety investigation has found the crash wasn't due to enemy fire. The soldier's family have been informed. And the Ministry of Defence has named the 3rd British soldier killed at the weekend in Afghanistan. 22-year-old Lance Corporal Dane Elson of 1st Battalion, the Welsh Guards, died on Sunday after being caught in an explosion whilst out on patrol as part of the current Panther's Claw military operation. The construction of the armed forces' largest ever warships began in Scotland today. The Princess Royal, dressed in naval uniform, performed the steel cutting ceremony for the first of the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carriers at BVT Surface Fleet's shipyard in Govan. A report by the Institute of Public Policy Research last week suggested they should be abandoned, and it's emerged that the government is to hold a full-scale review of the British Defence Forces and spending next year. President Obama has praised the Russian Prime Minister and former President Vladimir Putin for his extraordinary work in leading his country. The pair met for talks over breakfast on the 2nd day of Mr. Obama's visit to Moscow, a meeting Mr. Putin's aides described as very successful. In a later speech to graduate students, President Obama said the US sought a strong, peaceful and prosperous Russia and emphasized their country's common goals.
For any country to become a member of an organization like NATO, for example, a majority of its people must choose to. They must undertake reforms. They must be able to contribute to the alliance's mission. And let me be clear, NATO should be seeking collaboration with Russia, not confrontation.
Here, 3 men have been jailed for 4.5 years each for plotting to firebomb the home of the publisher of a novel about the Muslim prophet Muhammad's child bride. Abrar Mirza and Ali Beheshti admitted conspiracy to commit arson and recklessly endanger life in April. They, together with Abbas Taj, were caught on CCTV outside the London home of the publisher last September, as he'd been due to publish The Jewel of Medina, which traces the life of child bride Aisha from her engagement at the age of 6 till the prophet's death. The trial of a handyman accused of murdering a teenage girl 18 years ago has been halted because he's too ill to continue with the case. Jurors hearing evidence in the trial of Peter Tobin at Chelmsford Crown Court were discharged and a new trial date fixed for December. The 62-year-old denies murdering 18-year-old Dinah McNichol.
The government has tonight seen off an attempt by rebel Labour MPs to get full compensation for everyone who lost money when Gordon Brown abolished the 10p tax rate 2 years ago. A sustained and damaging Labour revolt last year forced the Chancellor Alistair Darling to compensate most taxpayers. But Labour backbenchers say that more than 1 million of the lowest paid are still worse off. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is in the House of Commons. Gary.
We've just had the vote. The government won by 43. That may sound like a walk in the park, but if I tell you some of the details of what's been going on in the background, you'll realise it isn't. This is the finance bill. The government was desperate to avoid any kind of defeat on it. They were ringing up MPs, seeing some of them face to face, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, telling them that the government was facing Armageddon. The gilt markets would go crazy, the currency would go crazy, all sorts of disasters would follow. They wouldn't be able to pay public sector servants, there wouldn't be benefit payments to their constituents who needed them. All sorts of disasters were MPs were told would happen if this vote went the wrong way. Well, it didn't, and you can say the government can breathe a sigh of relief at the end of that, but they had to exert all that pressure, tell those very slight porcupines, because you can actually keep government going by bringing in an amendment pretty sharpish and keeping MPs awake. They also had to get the Democratic Unionists on side and call in a favour with them. So although the figures look as though everything was an easy ride, it really wasn't here today.
Thank you, Gary, down at Westminster. After the break, 7 people in Britain have died after contracting swine flu and thousands have been infected. We report from the country's swine flu hotspot, the West Midlands, as a Birmingham MP warns that health chiefs have made the situation worse.
This is it. This is it.
On one side of the Atlantic, British fans prepared for the most eagerly anticipated comeback tour of all time.
This is it. See you in July.
On the other, racked by nerves, crippled by spiralling debts, and reportedly exhausted from prescription drugs, the King of Pop breathed his final breath. Jacques Peretti examines the singer's final days and the concerts that would prove a gig too far.
This is the final curtain call.
Michael Jackson's last days. What really happened? Sunday at 9 on 4.
They say that each one of us is one bad decision from a life sentence in prison.
It's gonna be a long day.
You know, you look at this and you say to yourself, this is it. You look to the future and there is none.
Filmed over 10 years, True Stories Maximum Jail. Tonight at 10 on More 4.
You're watching Channel 4 News. In a moment, claims that immigrants are being allocated social housing at the expense of locals are shot down in a report. But first, at 7:27, our main headlines tonight. Thousands of Michael Jackson fans are attending the singer's memorial concert in Los Angeles. His body has been taken there in a casket after a family funeral at a nearby cemetery. There have been further clashes in the Chinese city of Urumqi following the deaths of more than 150 people. Police used tear gas to disperse Han Chinese protesters, whilst Uyghur women demonstrated against the arrests of more than 1,400 people. And the tactics used against demonstrators in the G20 protests in London have been criticised by the police watchdog. The police were accused of failing to allow peaceful protest, and the watchdog said their containment tactics, known as kettling, needed to change. Now, the government is closing a legal loophole allowing some suspected war criminals to live in Britain but avoid prosecution. Back to Samira with that and the rest of the day's news.
The Justice Secretary Jack Straw is to close the gap in the law which has previously prevented the UK from prosecuting war criminals who committed atrocities before 2001. The law change, which was discussed between Gordon Brown and the Rwandan President Paul Kagame today, will apply to acts of genocide, war crimes and civil conflicts, and crimes against humanity committed after the 1st of January 1991. It follows a case earlier this year in which 4 men accused of taking part in the Rwandan genocide won a High Court battle to halt their extradition from the UK.
We're going to take this offence back a whole decade, so it will now be possible to prosecute people, for example, who were caught up in the Balkans atrocities or those which took place in Rwanda in the 1990s. This will, to use a current phrase, have a good chilling effect on those who think that this country is some kind of safe haven.
The government have closed one of 2 major loopholes in UK law in this area. What they must now do is move to ensure that anyone who is present in the UK can be prosecuted for these crimes, even if they are not legally resident, which is the current requirement of the law.
4 holidaymakers are still being treated in a Scottish hospital following a suspected norovirus outbreak on their cruise ship, which has berthed in Invergordon in Easter Ross. NHS Highland says about 380 people on board the Marco Polo have symptoms, including vomiting. A 74-year-old passenger died after a heart attack yesterday, but the German tour operator Transocean Tours said his death was unrelated to the bug. The government has ordered an urgent report into last Friday's fatal tower block fire in South London, which claimed 6 lives. Sir Ken Knight, the government's chief fire and rescue advisor, will collate the conclusions that come out of the ongoing investigation into the blaze in Camberwell. The Business Secretary, Lord Mandelson, was questioned by MPs today over his political accountability and his expanded department. The Business Select Committee wanted to know if the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills would survive any future change of government. Lord Mandelson was also asked if his role now mirrored that of Willie Whitelaw, Margaret Thatcher's deputy.
Margaret Thatcher and Willie Whitelaw. She famously remarked, every Prime Minister needs a Willie, so you are this Prime Minister's Willie. Is that your...
I'm tempted to extend the metaphor.
The coffee shop chain Coffee Republic has gone into administration, affecting 20 of its 187 UK outlets, which are directly owned. The rest are franchises or concessions in cinemas and hotels, and there are 10 outlets abroad. The firm has 153 directly employed staff. Administrators at KPMG have warned that job losses are inevitable at loss-making outlets. The number of different mortgage products on offer has dropped to its lowest level on record, according to the price comparison website moneysupermarket.com. At the height of the property boom, there were 30,000 mortgages to choose from. 2 years later, there are now just 2,282 different mortgages available. The markets now, and at the close, the index of 100 leading shares was down by 7 points. A short time ago, the pound was down against the dollar by over 1.25 cents, and sterling was down against the euro by almost 0.2%. Now, who says biography needs years of careful research and writing? 2 Chinese writers claim to have produced the fastest biography of Michael Jackson after working non-stop on the 130,000-word Moonwalk in Paradise, which has been on sale for 3 days. They wrote it in 48 hours. One of the authors says the book's an accumulation of years of information gathered as a music critic and Jackson fan. Some readers in this Beijing bookshop were divided over the merits of this speed job.
If the author can finish writing Michael Jackson's biography in just 2 days, it means he's very passionate about him. Even though the quality of the writing might not be so great, I believed in the credibility of the book, because the author clearly likes Jackson very much and should know a lot about him.
Claims that immigrants to the United Kingdom are given priority access to social housing have been dismissed as a myth tonight. A study commissioned by the Equality and Human Rights Commission has found no evidence that either economic migrants or asylum seekers receive preferential treatment, although there is a general misconception that they do. The study found that fewer than 2% of social housing tenants moved to the UK in the past 5 years. Almost 90% are British-born, and the remaining 10% moved here more than 5 years ago. The study into social housing, carried out by the Institute for Public Policy Research, comes just over a week after the Prime Minister announced measures he said would help local authorities to house more local people.
By building new and additional homes, we can also now reform social housing allocation, enabling local authorities to give more priority to local people whose names have been on waiting lists for far too long.
Well, joining us now from Westminster is the Housing Minister, John Healey. With us in the studio, Tim Finch from the Institute for Public Policy Research, who carried out the study for the Equality Commission. Tim Finch, let's just clarify what we're talking about here. First of all, no evidence that immigrants were queue jumping. Is that correct?
Absolutely right. No evidence of queue jumping or anybody trying to abuse the system in any way, and no evidence that there was any bias towards migrants in any sense. In fact, new migrants, those who've come here in the last 5 years, fewer of them are in social housing proportionately than the mainstream population. If you take migrants generally, those people who were born outside this country, it's about the same. So it couldn't be fairer, really.
But I can hear viewers for example, in Barking, which is a place I've been to and actually talked to people about housing, saying, you know, I started off at 26th in the housing list and I'm now at 103. And that seems to be, although it's anecdotal, it seems to be an experience in quite a large number of places. How do you account for that?
Well, I think there genuinely is an issue here. It's an issue of perception. Of course, it's the case that if you are in a queue for a housing and you need housing, you're desperate for it, and then you find someone from somewhere else has got it, you're going to feel aggrieved about it. The fact of the matter is, though, that it's not going to be that someone's going to have jumped the queue ahead of you because they are a migrant, and that's a really important issue.
But many are going to say this 2% is a jolly elastic 2%, because again, there is evidence of, for example, people coming from countries under pressure like Zimbabwe with families are going straight into social housing.
Well, they won't be. Most Zimbabweans will be claiming asylum, and asylum seekers are not allowed to go onto the social housing allocation queue until they've been accepted as refugees. If they are, then they are entitled to social housing. But there is no bias here, and I think one of the key issues that we've got here is that the government, as I understand it, have accepted the evidence of this IPPR report. There is no bias, and yet they seem to be suggesting that they need to take measures to correct a bias that doesn't exist.
Can they make local housing available to local people then? I mean...
Well, I don't quite see how. I think the danger is that if they're correcting a bias that doesn't exist, they're going to create a bias the other way. That might be discriminatory, and then there's the danger that people might take them to court because of that.
It feels as if we may have been here before. British jobs for British people, British houses for British-born people. Is that...
Well,
is this something about the BNP?
Well, I think definitely it's something to do with that, and there is a genuine political issue the government is facing. One of the problems, we've got to be transparent and honest with people about the issues we face. There is a shortage of social housing in this country, and we have had large levels of immigration in recent years, but you're not going to deal with that by mucking around with social housing allocation. The government spun this line of local homes for local people. They either wanted that headline or they could have anticipated it could come back, as British Jobs for British Workers did, and hit them in the face, I think.
Tim Finch, thank you very much. Well, let's turn now to John Healey, the Housing Minister. John Healey, it's simply untrue that immigrants are basically bumping people with a more local right to these houses down the list.
It is untrue, and it's good to have this report to confirm that. The pressure on the waiting lists comes because we don't have enough homes, and so one of the big things that Gordon Brown announced last week was extra money when times are tough for the public finances, switched into building new homes that people can afford to rent, and that in the long run will help to relieve some of the pressure.
But it's he who coined the local homes for local people. And what was all that about, if it wasn't basically simply a sort of trick, in a sense, to outmaneuver the BNP?
Well, one of the reasons this report is useful is that it confirms there is no bias in the system or favouritism or queue jumping by migrants, but it does also confirm that there is a problem with perception, because people do see the system as unfair, they see it as inflexible, they see it sometimes as not helping people who need to move to take up work. And that isn't just a question of white working class communities. It's strongly felt amongst Caribbean communities, it's strongly felt amongst Kashmiris or Bangladeshis, those that may have been in one place, in one community for 2 or 3 generations.
But forgive me, if there is no problem of bias, why does he have to coin the phrase local houses for local people? Because by your account, local people are getting the local houses when they're available. The only problem for local people is that, like every person, there isn't enough housing.
Well, building more housing is fundamental to
but you're not answering my
future.
question, which is why coin the phrase if there isn't a problem?
I'm going to come to your question now, but I want to make clear that building homes is the first part of the answer. I hope what the report does is allow us to move beyond this argument about immigration and migrants, because the important thing I'm trying to do with giving councils more leeway within the allocation system is to allow them to take account of the local needs and local pressures that they face. I'm talking to you in Westminster. Now, the pressures on housing here are very different to Wakefield or Western-super-Mare. So the answer for me is, once the councils have met the housing needs of those in most serious need, the top priorities, we can give them more scope to make decisions, for instance, to give...
Well, that's accepted, but at the same time, it's such an explosive issue that if it was all a lie anyway that there was any virus, it's surely an outrageous lie then to respond by saying local houses for local people. It's a nonsense.
No, absolutely not. Now, within 2 weeks, I will publish a full details of the sort of changes I'm proposing. I want a clearer, simpler system that councils do more to publicise so that people better understand the way that it works and who's getting the housing.
Minister?
That helps deal with the problem. But I want to give them more scope to allow preferences to people who may have been on the waiting list longer, who may be moving to look for work. They may want to attract more skilled workers or give priority to overcrowding. Now, those are the sort of decisions
transparency
that should
is exactly
be taken.
what the IPPR was asking for, so they'll be pleased with that. But thank you very much indeed for coming in, Minister. Well, at first it was prevention, then containment, and now treatment. The government's response to the growing number of swine flu cases has developed as the virus's spread gathers pace. But have the public kept up with the changes in policy and what it means to them? In the West Midlands, an NHS director has criticised the Health Protection Agency for its inconsistent and confused treatment policy. And the local MP has said advice is not reaching parts of the community. Our Midlands correspondent Darshana Soni has been to Birmingham to talk to the professionals and the victims in the city as the centre of the country's largest swine flu outbreak.
Flights cancelled and health workers on alert.
A 9-year-old girl dies from swine flu.
The government's chief medical officer is tonight warning there will be more.
It's the worst affected city in the country. But why has swine flu spread so fast here? Could socio-economic factors have contributed? The inner city area of Handsworth is home to racially diverse communities with high levels of deprivation. According to the Health Minister Andy Burnham, this social profile means families tend to be more close-knit, often with 3 generations living under one roof. But has the HPA been too slow in its response locally? In an unusually critical, outspoken attack, health chief bosses here in Birmingham have accused the HPA of inconsistency and confusion. The director of the Primary Care Trust has said that the HPA should be focusing on teaching different communities about how to prevent the disease. The local MP agrees with the criticism.
It's hugely serious that we control this very, very quickly and effectively. And if the HPA doesn't raise its game, then what we're going to do is have far bigger contamination and far bigger number of people affected by this, and making it truly epidemic.
This primary school saw the first mass outbreak of the disease in the country, with nearly 100 pupils affected. The school was closed for a time, but according to the Primary Care Trust, the HPA acted irresponsibly by giving Tamiflu to entire families, even to relatives not displaying any symptoms.
And we knew within half an hour that we had an unusual situation in school.
When dozens of children rang in sick on the Monday before half-term, the head teacher suspected something was wrong, but it took the HPA 4 days to officially diagnose swine flu. Now, the head of the PCT in Birmingham has been quite critical of the HPA's approach, and she's mentioned your school in particular and how long it took to deal with swine flu. What do you make of her criticisms?
Difficult to comment because I'm no medical person. A better description, the HPA rightfully were being careful. We know they reacted to our telephone call, and we know that we were in daily touch with them from the moment that we phoned them.
I spoke to one parent whose son was sent home from a school trip after contracting the disease.
I took his samples and they sent it to Heartland Hospital, and it took him 9 days to confirm that he had a swine flu. He's only a little lad, and he had a very high temperature, stomach pain, he was sick, he was keep falling unconscious.
The HPA has rejected criticisms and told us in a statement.
The HPA has been consistently clear and open that the primary aim of antiviral prophylaxis in the early stages of an epidemic is to attempt to limit the spread of the disease. This approach is set out in both the Department of Health and HPA pandemic plans, is supported by scientific evidence, and has been the subject of wide consultation over a number of years. It is important to note that the HPA, as an independent body, advises government on swine flu, but it is government and not the HPA that determines overall policy.
The organisation says it will learn lessons and that if the disease does strike again in the autumn as predicted, the city will be prepared. Darshana Soni, Channel 4 News, Birmingham.
After the break, the Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has more on his plate than the state of the world when he hosts tomorrow's G8 summit in L'Aquila. He's also facing attacks on his integrity because of his curious personal life.
The groundbreaking series Inside Nature's Giants continues.
In front of an invited audience, we're going to open up the ultimate predator, the crocodile.
A team of international experts investigate the grand designs of nature's most iconic beasts from the inside out.
The teeth of this animal's jaws just cones, and they're not particularly sharp.
And Richard Dawkins shows how their gross anatomy provides crucial proof of natural selection.
They are adapted to catch different kinds of prey. This one's adapted to catch fish.
Natural history like you've never seen it before. The series continues with The Crocodile. Inside Nature's Giants, Monday at 9 on 4.
Welcome to my parish.
Meet the men risking their lives to tend to their flock.
Let us pray.
The Padres, man, they've got the work cut out for them out here.
I'm here for them, not to condone war.
I'll have them made jewel any day. He's God's best friend, isn't he?
Revelations, Commando Chaplains, Sunday at 7 on 4.
As leaders of the world's richest countries descend on the Italian city of L'Aquila for tomorrow's G8 summit, the host's messy personal life is threatening to intrude on proceedings. Academics are appealing to the leaders' wives to stay away. Some 10,000 of them have signed a petition because of what they see as the Italian Prime Minister's offensive attitude to women. Silvio Berlusconi has denied his estranged wife's claims that he had a relationship with an 18-year-old. He won't have a First Lady with him in L'Aquila, but his Equal Opportunities Minister, a former topless model, is expected to play some sort of a hosting role. There's flash photography at the beginning of Stephanie West's report.
While Italy's flamboyant leader appears unruffled by his domestic troubles, his wife's departure does leave him with nobody to meet and greet spouses at the G8 summit. It's been suggested he believes Mara Cafagna, his Minister for Equal Opportunity, could step into the breach, but that choice would be a colourful one for several reasons.
Imagine all the people.
It's not just that the politician is a former topless model and Miss Italy contestant who used to work at one of the Italian leaders' TV stations. It's that after meeting the woman nicknamed Beautiful Mara, who describes herself as something of a prude, Berlusconi reportedly declared if he wasn't already taken, he'd have married Miss Carfagna immediately. That statement prompted his wife of 17 years, Veronica Lario, to publish a letter in La Repubblica, a left-leaning newspaper fiercely critical of her husband, declaring his comments about Miss Carfagna had damaged her dignity. To both my husband and the public man, she said, I demand a public apology, since I haven't received any privately. She later called her husband's choice of young female MEP candidates, including Barbara Matera, a beauty queen who's named Mara Carfagna as her political role model, shamelessly trashy. And then finally in May, she filed for divorce. And so on the eve of this three-day summit, where leaders will grapple with issues including promoting democracy in Iran and coordinating how world economies manage the financial rescue packages they've put in place, the likes of Michelle Obama and Sarah Brown are without an Italian First Lady to escort them. It's understood that Cleo Napolitano, the wife of the Italian President Giorgio Napolitano, is being considered as an alternative host for leaders' spouses. Certainly the heat is on Berlusconi. Italy's leading academics have urged all First Ladies not to attend the summit. Their petition condemning his behaviour towards women has 12,000 signatures. But his choices certainly please some. In a poll surely created just for her, men's magazine Maxim has ranked Miss Carfagna as the world's hottest politician.
Stephanie West. Well, one of Silvio Berlusconi's key associates, Senator Lucio Milan, joins us now from Rome. Senator Milan, the academics are complaining that basically it's not just your Prime Minister, it's the whole attitude in Italy towards women, and they really want to make a protest. It's enshrined in the way in which Mr. Berlusconi perhaps treats women, but it's typical of Italian society. That's what they're saying.
Well, I can certainly refuse this allegation, and I hope that there are more important problems to speak about at this summit. I think that everybody knows how Italians behave, both with women and with men, and I think that I see that so many millions of people come to visit Italy, and that means that Italians are not so rude, neither with women nor with men.
But if you were to go through the internet and look at the coverage of this event across the world by the world's media, the dominant issue is the Prime Minister's private life, the involvement of escorts alleged and all the rest of it. That is what is currently taking the headlines, and to some extent that's his fault, isn't it?
Well, that's probably something that raises the audience more than speaking about the international economic crisis or the democratization of Iran. We cannot do anything about it. Mr. Berlusconi, I think half an hour ago, said that all it is a fabrication, everything is a fabrication, and there's nothing true in the accusation, that they are not accusations, but say the gossip that has been made about him.
But the other thing, of course, which the academics are saying, and I've spoken to several professors today, they say, of course, in any case, because the Italian media is so dominated by Mr. Berlusconi's ownership, of course, these things don't get discussed as much in Italy as they do outside.
Well, I see that there is a very good coverage of this, so to say, issue in Italy. Everybody can buy newspapers and see news about this affair. And I actually see, it is even astonishing, but people don't look very interested in this thing. They are more interested about the economic situation of the country, of the problem of security and so on. I know it can sound strange, but if you go and speak to the people, people will mention many other things before this.
Senator Milan, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Rome. And don't forget, if you missed anything from tonight's programme, you can use the 7-day catch-up service on our website. More 4 News at 8 is next. We're back tomorrow at noon and again at 7. Until then, from Samira and from me, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Calm down, dear. These aren't real fish. It's sponsorship for Esure, the insurance experts.
Thundery downpours will continue for a time this evening, but much of Britain will become dry and quite cool overnight. Showers will develop again tomorrow, but they will be lighter and far less widespread than today. Southwestern parts of England and Wales may see no more than an odd light shower, with many places around here staying dry. Occasional bright spells will lift temperatures to around 19 Celsius, but there'll be a cool breeze. It's a similar picture for other western parts of Britain, rather a lot of cloud and a chilly breeze, but only a very few light showers. The risk of showers is higher for eastern counties, and 1 or 2 may be on the sharp side, but they won't be the thundery downpours that many have experienced today. Maximum temperatures will be around 20 Celsius. Showers will be much more isolated on Thursday and Friday, with many places dry, but still rather cloudy.
Esure, the only insurance company approved by me. Michael winner.
Tonight from 10 on More 4, an insight into America's largest maximum security prison. True stories, maximum jail.
This man is on a mission.
Sir Jerry Robinson's coming in today. He's a very big player.
With 2 companies in trouble, all they have to do is convince Jerry they have a future.
You're not even talking to one another.
Will Jerry save them?
I'm prepared to offer £1 million.
Jerry's big decision. Thursday at 9 on 4.
Hello, I'm Charlie Brooker. I've got just 16 seconds to tell you about my new show you have been watching. I've already wasted half of that time, well, maybe a third, actually probably more like a half now. Let's just say 5/8, OK? It's on tonight at 10 o'clock. We'll be talking about the week's TV. Please watch.
A market in free fall, property, snakes and ladders, a dangerous game to play, 8 o'clock. First up, we play politics.
I'm here in Westminster North at the mentoring project Step Up to talk about why social action is at the heart of Conservative thinking in new politics. Over the last 3 years, Conservatives up and down the country have been engaged in over 150 social action projects, from elderly lunch clubs to drama classes to park cleanups. It's all part of doing your bit for your community.
Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Really good to see you here today again. You've all had a briefing already about Step Up. The goal of our project and of Step Up is to give the students the helping hand that they need to realise their potential. The most important thing is to identify what their ambitions are, what their goals are, what, if there were no other obstacles in life, what they'd most like to do, and to help them work backwards to achieve that. This is our second year of doing it, but this year we've partnered with London Tigers, with MESPA, which means we were reaching far more students across the constituency, which is fantastic.
Today we're here to help you guys try and get into jobs, into university. Joanne's going to head up her project, which is to do with Step Up, and she's got a team of people here who are going to support you guys. I'll let Joanne actually introduce that part.
About just over a year ago, I set up this project called Step Up, which has a double meaning. It means give people a step up, and also they step up to take the help.
I was just fascinated by how things work at the tiniest level, so I picked biology and chemistry.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty good reason to pick that. You can have the 3 A's, the 3 A stars, etc. But at the end of the day, even universities like Oxbridge, they aren't just looking for the perfect on-paper student. They're looking for the student who wants it, who knows why he wants it, and who has intellectual curiosity.
Today we're going to give you career advice, which is what you're looking for, but also want to pan back and look at your long-term career goals and see if we can do your retail summer work and link it to that as well.
This is Mohammed, who's been redoing his CV this morning.
So what do you think of your CV now? Is it done, or are you still working on it?
I want to work on it at home and send it to her.
Right. Right. And what has this brought for you, Mohammed? How has it helped you?
Like now, probably